Just welcome to one and all to this distinguished online lecture at the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. To start the proceedings of the distinguished lecture, I first of all request Dr. Nandakishore to kindly give the welcome remarks. Dr. Nandakishore, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Monish. And it's been a while. We have been thinking about having different scholars and individuals who have made a mark in life. And Professor Chintamani Mahapatra is known to Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, though for this batch of students is new. But in terms of looking at international relations and strategic affairs, he is one such personality anybody would look into. Perhaps one of my early interactions with him when I joined in 2011 was that he triggers with his remarks. He makes certain remarks that are very, very relevant, and that makes people to think, and that makes people to question. And that's the only way perhaps we will move. That's something that I learned from him in any lecture. We need to be not just presenting what is known or not presenting what has been written already, but talking about certain things that makes people to think. I think that's the process, and that's the way there is a possibility to take forward knowledge itself. So at the department, there is no introduction to him in the sense about the department. He doesn't need an introduction. He's been part and parcel of it since the beginning of this particular department. He has seen the ups, downs, everything for that matter. He has been here a number of times, and we have all grown up seeing his works, his writings, and we've been listening to him. It's an extremely happy day for us in the department. He agreed when I requested him for a distinguished lecture. He readily agreed, and we could take up this particular topic, which is very, very relevant, which is contemporary in terms of looking at the national security from the COVID-19 as a pandemic perspective. This is also relevant because in this semester we have India's national security and defense management as a unit. Perhaps this would be one of those last lectures in terms of the whole course itself, which is a perfect one, because if we don't include aspects such as COVID-19, which has disrupted or which has given a new dimension to national security from the traditional way of looking at it all over the world. It's not just a phenomenon with regard to India, but it has also changed quite a few things. But at the same time, there are nations which continue to manage the national security scenario, fighting the pandemic, yet they're in fight with some other countries. So it's a very precarious sort of a scenario. Perhaps he is the person who can probably give us some of those pointers, some of those things to think, and then further percolate to others in terms of national security and the pandemic itself. I'm extremely happy that he agreed to deliver this particular lecture. So on my behalf, personal behalf, and on behalf of the department and Manipal Academy of Higher Education, I'm grateful to you, sir, and welcome to this particular lecture. Dr. Monish.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Nandakishore, for setting the platform and setting the tone and tenor of today's distinguished online lecture, as stated on a very relevant theme, that makes us think about the continuities and also the changes of India's national security. It is my honor and privilege and opportunity to be introducing to you, although Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, sir, doesn't need any introduction, to whoever follows the broad contours of international relations, US studies, and also Indian foreign policy studies. But it is my honor and opportunity to be given the opportunity to introduce someone who taught me the ABC of international relations. Whatever little I know and write about international relations, I owe it to him, to my mentor. For the benefit of the student audience, let me have the honor of introducing Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, who is currently Rector, Pro Vice Chancellor of Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and Professor of American Studies at the School of International Studies of JNU. He is also the founder and the honorary chairperson of the Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. He is also the editor of Indian Foreign Affairs Journal. He has held a number of positions, including member UGC Review Committee, Area Studies Program, member Fellowship Expert Committee, ICSSR, member Editorial Board, Strategic Analysis, IDSA, now called MP-IDSA, member Editorial Board, Diaspora Studies, and member Committee on Studies, Academy of International Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia. He was also a Tagore Chair Professor at the Yunnan University of China and has conducted research in several US presidential libraries and US National Archives and the British Public Record Office in London. Professor Mahapatra has authored 4 books, 1 edited volume, has contributed chapters to about 30 edited books, and has published about 70 research articles in reputed journals. He has been awarded a number of international fellowships, such as Fulbright Fellowship, Commonwealth Fellowship, and visiting fellowships to undertake research in the US, UK, Austria, Australia, and many other countries. He has been a visiting faculty in several UGC-run academic staff colleges, the Foreign Service Institute of the Ministry of External Affairs, National Defense College, Army War College, Naval War College, and the College of Air Warfare. He has also been a regular commentator in newspapers and on audio-visual media on international affairs. So without wasting any more time and without any further ado, I will not stand between you and Professor Chintamani Mahapatra. Every year since I entered international relations and took it up as a part and bread and butter of my life for the last more than decades, every day has been a learning experience for me. Reading his works, talking to him, and listening to his lectures. So I earnestly look forward to this lecture, and I think it will be a great learning experience for both faculty members and the student community. The screen is yours, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nandkishore, Dr. Manish Torangam, Dr. Anand, dear students. I was waiting for an opportunity where I could come down to your place and interact with you front to front. Hopefully that opportunity will come in the future. But in any case, technology is a big savior during the pandemic, and this is an opportunity where I can discuss with you some issues which affect India, the Indians, including all of us, in the midst of the pandemic. The pandemic is not over. The second wave is still going on. Third wave is expected. And life is terrible in India and in many, many parts of the world, including in major European and American continents and in Asia as well. Now, national security is a very broad term, and my discussion with you is not going to be either bookish or textbookish. What is security? What is national security? What is not? How many types of security are there? Forget about all those. I'll just make a few observations on different developments that took place related to India's national security issues and concerns as and when we were combating the coronavirus in India. As an introduction, let me remind you that this is almost a century event. About 100 years ago, we had a similar kind of pandemic in the world, the Spanish flu. And that time, India was not an independent country. That was the era of colonialism and imperialism. So there were not many Indians who could question even the government of the day, why you did this or why you did not do that. That was a different time. About 110 lakhs of Indians died in that Spanish flu. Now it is 4 lakh plus. Some people say this is underreported, maybe multiply by 2, 8 lakhs. But that was 110 lakhs, 11 million people, more than that, perished in Spanish flu. Today the situation is drastically different. India is a vibrant democracy with multiple political parties, people with diverse ideological convictions, India is considered to be an emerging power in world affairs. And India has been confronting two adversarial neighbors for decades, Pakistan and China. Today, people are questioning the government policy, and people at the same time are aware that the government could tackle the problem in much better ways because we are an independent country. So, first of all, I'll talk a little bit about the domestic fallout of the pandemic. In other words, national security is not just a concern when Pakistan sends some terrorists across the border or the Chinese come and flex their military muscle along the LAC. Or maybe some major powers, they send their warships to Indian Ocean. National security are also important in terms of security within the country. So when we discuss national security issues or issues that affected or going to affect India's strength in future are important. So what are the domestic fallout of the pandemic? Number one, all of you know very well, and you would have watched on television, how hundreds of thousands of laborers were roaming around in the streets and crowding the railway stations when the factories and the industry were closed down because of the national lockdown. They wanted to go back home for food, for shelter. They lost all their jobs. And their livelihood was a big question mark. That would not make India a strong nation. However, it is not just the migrant laborers who suffered, and we watched even on television. Even the small and medium businesses and some of the corporate sectors were also badly hit by the pandemic. Imagine the people who are running restaurants, which became empty. Imagine the people who are running the travel agencies. People stopped traveling and the impact on their business. Imagine the people who are running multiplexes, cinema halls, other kinds of entertainment sources. So all these small and medium businesses were also affected very badly. When the industries stopped, the factories stopped, and all these activities came to a standstill, labor class, certainly they were the worst kind of victims. But even these people also got affected. That did not make India strong. There was a massive reduction in the GDP growth rate, unprecedented rise in unemployment. And when I say rise in unemployment, it is not just the migrant laborers who lost their jobs and went back home. Imagine about 600 million Indians were working in the Persian Gulf area. Even there, the jobs dried out. They were asked to leave. And they are sending a lot of money home, and now they're unemployed. They're coming back home at a time when unemployment situation at home is precarious. So imagine the impact at that level. And how about the plight of the homeless people? So there was a huge industrial loss as well. Now, the financial insecurity and anxiety over the future has taken a great psychological toll among the people, making mental health conditions of the masses perilous. One can see, one can observe, the poor people and their conditions. But who can see the mental agony in almost literally every household? Either the loss of a near and dear one, or people who need support because they are still suffering the acute coronavirus pandemic. And same with the relatives or the friends and all. So that was terrible. The mental health became a major issue in India, a country which is proud of its temples, its churches, its mosques, and the spiritual tradition, and did not think much about all these things because they were by and large spiritual. Mental health became such a major problem. Even gods could not help. And the impact of this psychological problem and material loss contributed to the problem of maintaining social cohesion and domestic peace. Automatically, it showed up in anger, in frustration, in domestic conflict and violence, and of course, the rising crime rate. If you go through the annual report of the police department of the Home Ministry, of course, you see a different figure. Crime kam ho gaya hai data, because many of the crimes could not even be reported. But the kind of socio-economic problem we faced and the rising inequality and unemployment and loss of jobs and income, it led to rise of crime, which is yet to be documented properly. But one can feel the kind of violence that took place at home and even outside. In the midst of all this development, all of you saw the persistent protest by the farmers. And I don't want to go into the details because of the paucity of time. If you want, we can discuss that. That created a situation where we felt that social instability, political instability was a major problem. Now, all these developments in the domestic scene affected India's national security situation. There is no doubt about it. However, there is a different side to this. At least, I don't know whether you will agree with me or not, I gave certain amount of credit to the government. In spite of all these problems, massive problems, we felt that essential goods were by and large available. And after the lockdown, which was imposed suddenly, after the lockdown, industrial and agricultural activities resumed in a major way. There were hardly any communal strife or class conflicts or mass hunger or severe law and order problem that could have attracted the attention of the international community. It did not happen. It did not happen. Now, that is why, in a way, we can thank our stars that we managed such a massive pandemic at home, I think in a slightly better way than many other countries. This is the domestic scenario. How about the external security? As I explained, China and Pakistan. Just give me a second. Just how do I mute myself? So sorry about that. Now, in the external sector, there are two things that are three issues that I will discuss. One, of course, is what happened along the LAC, the line of actual control. Now, all of us know that China has posed a challenge to India for a pretty long time. We also know that in the midst of the pandemic, when India was confronting the situation in a very big way at home, the Chinese came not only to flex their muscles by sending their troops along the border, but also there was a clash. Now, China took advantage of certain situation at this time. Number one, not only India, but also the United States and the European Union and so many other friends of India, all of them were handling this lethal pandemic at home. And when every country, major country, important powers in the Indo-Pacific were busy in combating the coronavirus, China began to flex its muscle along the border. And another time which coincided, India was increasingly known as an emerging power. increasingly playing an important role in international affairs. And there was a rising trend of Indo-US strategic cooperation and collaboration in the Indo-Pacific region. In the backdrop of all these, what China probably, this is my hunch, what China probably thought is the best time to test the Indians. And the strategy was to engage the Indians in border tension, confront them, very limited confrontation, and test the reaction of India, how India would behave. This was a strategy, but the goal was very clear. How to deal a big knockback to India's ambition to be a major international power. We all know about the 1962 syndrome. So if India would be given some kind of blow along the LAC, then India's ambition to become a major power could be blocked. At the same time, the Chinese were convinced that the American strategy to befriend India, to contain China, although many countries don't use the word containment, the Chinese strongly feel that the US wants to contain China and India is a part of that. They thought that by troubling India along the border, they would be able to bring about a big challenge to Indo-US partnership. And at the same time, kill the Quad initiative in its bud. That was the Chinese intention. When this national security threat came straight on our face, again here the Modi government did the following. It deployed the Indian troops along the border in a massive number to counter the Chinese. And as and when the Chinese wanted to fight, there was a fight also, big fight in Galwan Valley. And of course, the Chinese would not report how many soldiers were killed, but India apparently gave back. And of course, we acquired all the necessary material hardware through arms purchases. Then we very boldly gave a message to China. We are ready to fight if you want to. India was ready to fight if China wanted to. And then, of course, our proactive diplomacy around the world to paint the Chinese black and to say that how, when the world is gripped with a pandemic, the Chinese are interested in expanding their borders by invading neighboring countries. Now, Pakistan. Pakistan tried its best to destabilize Kashmir. It failed. And during the pandemic, and particularly during the India-China tension around the border, Pakistan tried its best, of course, diplomatically also, to change the status quo of Kashmir if possible. But Pakistan miserably failed in that strategy. And Indian diplomacy triumphed. So whatever decision we took in 2019, and stuck to it by saying that this was India's domestic affair, and we did whatever we did as part of our sovereign right to do so. So we saw the outcome of that Indian effort. Of course, Pakistan was constrained. Under normal circumstances, probably things would have been much different. The so-called well-advertised China-Pakistan Economic Corridor project was not doing very well, number one. Number two, the country's economy was in a precarious situation. Pakistan became dependent on foreign aid for its survival in a way. And the aid was not flowing in. And then, of course, the prospective withdrawal of the American troops from Afghanistan also led to a lot of uncertainties within Pakistan. And due to all these reasons, Pakistan, in a way, Pakistan's activities were contained. The third important issue, which had some bearing on the national security, was, of course, India's soft power game. The Modi government was remarkably successful in portraying a positive image of India by not only developing an indigenous vaccine but also collaborating with Oxford and having another vaccine development, and then exporting or giving free uh, millions of doses of these vaccines. After some time, when we had the second wave, of course, the government of India came on tremendous amount of pressure and criticism. What was the need to export all these vaccines and give it free to the neighbors when India had such a massive number of people to be vaccinated within India? It was no good. So that kind of criticism came. But soon we realized that one of the reasons why the second wave took place was because of the new variant, the Delta variant. And of course, there were some issues, like the political rallies and religious gatherings, and people were not abiding by the COVID-19 guidelines, and so many factors were there. But soon we realized that the diplomacy, the vaccine diplomacy, brought certain amount of gain to India, at least internationally. There was no international criticism. Not only that, at a time when China was being blamed on this Wuhan virus for hiding information and not telling the world in right time about what happened. That time, India giving vaccines to many countries, millions of doses. It appeared in the international scene that China was the culprit and India was coming out as one of the saviors. And this kind of image was built up also because even powerful countries like the United States, Germany, and many other European countries, those powerful countries were indulged in what is known as vaccine nationalism. And the discourse on vaccine nationalism was taking place when India apparently appeared to be following a policy of vaccine internationalism by helping others. And in the process, when India badly needed the vaccines and other kinds of help, all of you must have watched on television the pathetic scene, the heart-touching scene in the hospitals, no bed, no oxygen, even cremation ground were full. People were queuing up to bury or to burn their dead bodies and all. And India was facing shortages of oxygen. The largest producer of oxygen became an importer. And the country which helped many countries, many countries and dozens of countries by supplying them the vaccines, had to import, during that time. Help did come. Those who did some research on this, they found that help did come in time from the US, from France, from many other countries. And when Joe Biden, the American president, said that at the time of our need, India helped us. It is our turn to help India. So that was a soft power game. Of course, when you analyze the details, so many other nuanced analysis can be made. But by and large, India gained considerable amount of soft power, and that was a national security game for India. In the last part of my lecture, very briefly, I'll touch upon one or two consequences or the challenges of the pandemic for India. Now, number one, outcome. When China began to build up its image by selling their own vaccines, they also sold it and gave free also to some of the smaller neighbors of India in South Asia. For a long time, Chinese have been trying to help economically and otherwise the smaller countries and build their own constituencies there so that they could influence the decision making in India's neighborhood. During the pandemic, particularly second wave, when India was no longer in a position to give vaccines to anyone and the Chinese came in a big way, that was not a positive impact for India. And secondly, some of the neighboring countries which had already fallen into the debt trap and other countries were about to do so. China's control over India's neighbors became stronger during the pandemic. The trend had already started. The pandemic accelerated it. In future, that becomes a challenge, remains a challenge for India. Domestically, we debated. We debated because India was an emerging economic powerhouse as well. Many foreign companies were coming to India and investing. India was one of the attractive destinations of foreign companies. A pandemic dealt a heavy blow. Then income inequality in India expanded, and in the process, having the potential of social conflict. And the unemployment problem also that directly hit millions of people in India. So the big question that is still being debated is whether India would have a V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped recovery after the pandemic. In my view, all these are premature to talk about it because the pandemic is still on and the third wave is likely. So how can we talk about the post-pandemic now, even if it is pure economic analysis? In the times to come, we'll find the collection of tax will be less. So even the government has suffered. The deficit has increased. Tax collection has decreased. And income inequality has expanded. Although the government did a very right thing by giving free food to the millions of people, breakfast, lunch, dinner, the grains and all that. That is a good thing. But then that is not economic growth. That is handling poverty issue. Millions of people who were in the middle class went down and became poorer. And millions of people went down below the poverty line. And those who were already below the poverty line, they became abjectly poor. These are the challenges a country is going to face. Now, does it mean that India's position in the structure of world power will now change a great deal? Does it mean that India will no longer be able to claim a position around the big table of decision making in world affairs? Does it mean that India's image has got a beating? I disagree. The structure of the international relations after the pandemic will by and large remain the same. I mean, the trend that we saw before the pandemic, similar trend will continue in the future. Certainly, India was affected and hard hit by the pandemic. But which country was not? Look at the United States, look at Europe, look at Japan, look at South Korea. Literally every country in the world literally got badly affected by the pandemic, and so did India. So it was actually a lose-lose situation for everyone. Of course, what's happening in China, we don't know. Many people in China is doing very well. In China, people are not dying. China has become a major power. That's a different ballgame altogether. But in the foreseeable future, despite the difficulty faced by many countries, including India, I don't see a future where China will emerge as a superpower and pose a big challenge to the post-pandemic era in India. So with these brief observations, I would rather like to have interactions and questions and comments from you so that we can learn together on this critical topic. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, sir, for a broad, sweeping lecture. That touch a lot of notes, I think, and it should be food for thought for many of the students and scholars present here today. And I'm sure that we'll be ready with questions to take the discussion forward. In my mind, I think it's a really interesting lecture in terms of not only looking at the internal and external dimensions of the ever-evolving notion of national security from India's point of view, but also to look at the pandemic, what these 2 years have done, I think, to many things that affect the way we study they affect the way we live our lives. I think years from now on, this will be the era that scholars will dig dive on and discuss what were the impact. I think from a hindsight also, I think we are in the midst of the pandemic right now, and our perspectives as they evolve, I think will also evolve of how we look at the impact that this 2 years has had on so many things. Uh, I think you brought out very well, sir, in terms of looking at uh, one, that the pandemic has affected countries all over the world, big or small, and in that sense, there's a similarity of experience on different dimensions of national security, whether it's the United States or whether it is a small country in South America or whether it is a populous country like India, a growing country like India. But also the peculiarities and the specifics of each country's experience of how it has dealt with the impact of the pandemic. Um, the particularity of the India-China border crisis that you brought out is something which is particular to India. Not an experience which not might be found in other countries during the pandemic, for instance. So in that sense, I think it has opened up a lot of questions. And again, I will open up the floor now for questions from the students. Please use the hand raise bar to raise your hand and identify yourself before posing the question to Professor Mahapatra. Yes, so the floor is open. You can raise your hands. Oh.
There is one hand. Sharma, Subi, take.
Okay, while others are gathering their thoughts and noting down their questions, I will ask Vasu Sharma to unmute himself and ask his question.
Good evening, sir. This is Vasu Sharma, a student of second semester in the department. So first of all, thank you very much for your enriching lecture. So my question is regarding the Chinese vaccines and Chinese arms export in South Asia. As we know, recently there were some reports which suggested that China had priced different prices for Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, and later on one of its embassies had cleared there that this was a fake news. And and even the SIPRI reports, they had mentioned that after Pakistan, Bangladesh is a country which is a huge importer, which imports arms from China, and even certain reports of CSIS suggested arms import of Chinese arms import in Myanmar. So can we say that vaccine and arms, like after Chinese investments, these vaccines, Sinopharm vaccines and arms trade in South Asia can be other limbs of Chinese influence in South Asia? Thank you, sir.
Certainly. You see, Sino vaccine, Sinopac, Sinovac, whatever, all those things will have moral impact, because people are dying, they're suffering, they're getting a medicine, it is a Chinese name. So it is a game in terms of soft power. China becomes a household name as a savior, as a helper, etc. But as far as the weapons are concerned, if the number of weapons purchased by the South Asian country from China in terms of percentage becomes more, obviously China will have direct and indirect both influence in the military decision making of those states. As of now, I would not express too much of concern for India for the following reasons. Number one, probably no country in the world is waiting with all eagerness to buy weapons from China. Although the other cheap Chinese goods are popular, these kind of weapons are not so popular. They would like to have better weapons. But China is making use of its other influences in order to, in order to be able to influence the decision making in smaller countries, where the military would play a role in all kinds of decision making. by supplying weapons and then going and training them and teaching them how to use those weapons, this mutual training program and all, they want to expand their constituency in the military. So that will be a net gain for China. Although in terms of sophistication of the weapons and the threat it is going to pose to India, it is very minimal. In terms of rising Chinese influence in the neighborhood, it is going to be substantial, and that is something to worry about. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you, sir. We have a question from Dr. Nandakishore.
Yeah. No, this is on behalf of one of our student, Mr. Daksh. He asks, why is India hesitant to push and raise the Uyghur issue, knowing that it's a sore point for China and the refusal of Pakistan to acknowledge? Are there any benefits of raising the Uyghur cause, or is there no significant net gain? Is his question, sir.
In this group, we are all Indians, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You see, there are certain issues which are so critical for a country like India that it is better to either keep our mouth shut or in a very reserved way make a few sentences, don't make it too obvious and too loud. And all these things should be understood by us. As students, you are all young people, your thinking will be different, the kind of questions you would ask are different. You want clear answers, why it's like that, why it is not like that. But there are certain issues where the diplomacy would play a kind of balancing role. Now, as far as the Uyghur incident is concerned, there are so many countries which are part of the Organization of Islamic Countries. They are not raising too much of hue and cry on that. Even Afghan Taliban or even the Pakistani Taliban, I have not seen much of a statement either warning China. Maybe there's some stray cases are there. Even they're also keeping their mouths shut. So why should India, wave the flag of exploitation of Uyghur in China? How is it going to help India? It is going to be tutu meme. They will also point out something about India. But is it really going to help India? If yes, we should do that. But we should be convinced ourselves who should be the right person to raise which question. For example, let me give another example. Hong Kong. Whatever happened in Hong Kong, the destruction of democracy, the European countries and even the United States, they made statements, expressed concern, and then what did they do? Nothing. Right. So in the world of diplomacy, it is advisable to say those things in a right place at the right time, which will help the country. Otherwise, it is better to reserve our tongue than to speak out. So even here, I'm not being very, very clear and forthright in what I want to say, but I hope that you have understood what I'm hinting at.
Thank you, sir. Kiran Kumar Bhatt has a question. Kiran, can you unmute and, if possible, put on your video?
Good evening, sir. So my question is regarding the Atmanirbhar Bharat, which we launched, which the government has launched. So can you feel that it is a replication of the big deal which was launched by FDR? Is there any similarities?
No. FDR, the New Deal was different. Atmanirbhar Bharat is basically self-reliance, slogan. Now, when India became independent, even a pencil was imported from Great Britain. There was nothing that we could produce at home. Our agriculture was in a bad state, right? But today, through the slow process of evolution, is there anything that we don't produce in India, including nuclear bomb? or the missiles. We have come a long way in last 70 years. It's not enough. We have to go ahead further. But if you really make an analysis of Indian weapons and even aircraft and so many, you'll find that we are by and large dependent on foreign sources. Right? Even the vaccine that we produce, we have to import different ingredients from many countries. Then only we produce vaccine and we become the #1 producer of vaccine in the world. The pandemic has actually taught a good lesson. On critical items, where the security and sovereignty of a country would be at stake, it is better to be Atmanirbhar, completely self-reliant. As much as possible, 100% self-reliance in everything is not at all possible, not even for America. See, America is a big superpower. It intervened in Afghanistan. There are more than 40 countries which are helping them. It is not just America, Atmanirbhar, America first, America alone will do something in Afghanistan. No. So it is a system of complex interdependence. So 100% Atmanirbharta means autarkic system, which is not possible in this age of globalization. But the message is very clear that on certain critical items, if we can do it at home, why look it abroad is the big question. It is in that context. Otherwise, it can send a wrong message even to other countries. If India wants to build everything on its own and India doesn't want to buy things from us, why should we buy from India? Can India do everything on its own? No, it cannot. But the New Deal of FDR was different. The New Deal was in response to the Great Depression. After World War I, in the 1920s, in American history, they call it the Roaring 20s. That was the time when the American industrial expansion took place in a very big way. Electricity came, all the household things, the washing machine and stove, and all those things came. People became very happy and they began to think life is hunky-dory. They thought like the ending of the Hindi movie. Iske baad sab kuch acha hai, And suddenly in 1929, you had the big crash of the stock market. And then the billionaires in the United States were seen selling apples on the roadside. Industries were down, factories were closed, banks went bankrupt, people were unemployed. Just like Gurudwara mein hota hai na, langar khana plate leke. People stood in the queue for food in the US. So when the economy was down and it became global, the only one country which was not affected by the Great Depression was the former Soviet Union, because that was a communist country. Otherwise, it was global. In order to restore the economic stability and stop the erosion of the economic growth, FDR took certain measures. Now, those measures were criticized by some people as socialistic. But actually, it was not socialistic. He wanted to protect capitalism. That's why he took those actions. But at the moment, this Atmanirbhar Bharat, the message is India is becoming an economic powerhouse. Yes, we would like to be part of the international market, but on critical items, India should try to be as self-reliant as possible so that we are not vulnerable to external pressure and blackmail at critical times. That is the goal. Right. Thank you for your question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Kiran. Is there any more questions from the students or from the faculty? Yes, Anand has a question. Anand, yes.
Sir, my question is something which is very basic. We today talk about, if you look at even from the India's national security point of view, the China threat has become a big issue for us, and aligning with the United States has become more and more imperative for us. We talk about it from the perspective of the pandemic, post-pandemic development. Maybe you trace it a little back. You go to the US-China trade war and decoupling debate. How much old you can put this deep decoupling between United States and China? Where can you trace this decoupling to actually start? Did it start only with the Trump administration, or did it have something which was before that also?
Decoupling did not start in a very big way earlier. Everybody knew that the disease was coming and spreading. Some of them wanted to decouple. But the amount of profit the Chinese are gaining by doing business in China, it is the American business which is most pro-China than anybody else in the USA. Even in the US Congress, those who think about the human rights, those who think about the defense and security, those who think about vulnerability to the Chinese influence in decision making within the USA, those who are worried about the Chinese even financing, offered articles in American newspapers, they're concerned about China. But the businesses, they would like to do business, and they will give all kinds of, explanation. For the pandemic, for the Trump administration, he looked like a rogue, he spoke like a rogue, but he did many things which everybody would appreciate otherwise. That is why you'll find that as far as the China policy is concerned, even the Biden administration has continued the Trump policy, right? Having said that, decoupling completely is going to be a lose-lose kind of equation between US and China. Neither the US nor China would like to have that. Initially, the grand strategy of the USA was to engage the Chinese economically so much that ultimately their communist system will be completely meaningless, and China would become a neo-normal quasi-capitalist country in real sense of the term and play ball. What happened was, instead of persuading China to become a real stakeholder, all these American goody-goody behavior and opening up of China and doing business with them, ultimately it strengthened the Chinese Communist Party and by implication strengthened the Chinese military. So China, which was supposed to be a co-partner, became a major challenger to the USA. Partly because of the growth and expansion of the Chinese technical capabilities, the quality of their academic research, and even R&D in science and technology, the Americans have begun to perceive a big threat, including artificial intelligence, right? So Americans, as they have been, they will never completely decouple. They will try to bargain. They will try to balance. They will try to protect the erosion of the American edge in science and technology and other capabilities. Because decoupling is not going to help them at all. There are 100+ countries with which China is the number one trade partner. In India, we complained, we shouted, we criticized, we condemned what the Chinese were doing in LSC. But today we find that even during the pandemic, China turned out to be the number one trade partner of India, not the USA. So because of these material considerations, isolating China will never be in American interest. They will not do that. That is why your question is valid, because we should not be carried away by this US-China trade tension and the trade war and decoupling and all that. We have to maintain our own balance. It should not be China, either China or the US. It should be always India. And depending on case-by-case issues, we should be taking positions. Right. So that's why this is a very valid question that we are raising, that whether decoupling is going to take place. Not going to take place completely. Thoda bahut to hoga. Thoda bahut hoga. And let me give you another example. China has billions of dollars of BRI program, Belt and Road Initiative. Do the Americans have that much of money to challenge the Americans? No. This Asian Investment Bank, where India is also a member, does the US have the money to give that kind of assistance? No. For simple reason. that the US American government does not have, does not control the American economy. It is in the private hand. Big capitalist, corporate America, right? They're very powerful. In China, all major companies are American government companies. So it is very difficult. So when Xi Jinping would come to India and shake hand with Modi and swing in that riverfront and say, we will invest $20 billion in India. Then he will go to Pakistan. We will invest $60 billion in Pakistan. Then he will go to Latin America. Say China is committing $110 billion in Latin America. Can an American president say so? No, because systems are different. So how to handle that? That is the key. Not decoupling. Not decoupling. Managing is the key word.
Thank you, sir. Priyanka, you can go ahead with your question.
Good evening, sir. My name is Priyanka Jaiswal and I'm a first year student at the department. I wanted to ask your opinion on the impact of the pandemic on India's demographic dividend, and if the pandemic has affected or threatened India's demographic dividend, then its probable impacts on India's national security in the coming years.
Good question. Good question. You see, at one time in India, people were saying India is a populous country. There are too many people in India everywhere, but they're poverty stricken. They're not educated. Largest concentration of illiterates and uneducated in the world are in India. The most, the number of people who are poor in India, they outnumber the total population of Africa and Latin America and all those things. But as the Indian economy evolved and the number of people who were ranked in the middle class increased, the number of billionaires in India went into hundreds, then the world came to look at India in a different way. The focus was not on the poor in India, the focus was more on the middle class market and of course the richer class, the luxury goods market and all that. Right. Now, population becomes a strength and demography becomes a dividend when the people are well fed, well dressed, and they have good amount of purchasing power. If people are unemployed and the poor and homeless and they can't feed them properly, they can't educate their children, it is no longer a dividend. It becomes a liability. For how long you are going to subsidize food for the poor people? For how long you are going to give unemployment bhatta? For how long you are going to subsidize the agriculture sector? You cannot run a country and make it prosperous on the basis of subsidies. So the whole idea was to reduce the subsidy, expand the people who will have their own purchasing power, and then they would attract the foreign businessmen and the traders and the investors. That was the goal. That was happening. But unfortunately, the pandemic has hit the middle class very hard. According to one estimate, 45 million people have lost their status as a middle class Indians. And there are many more people who went below the poverty line. So when the number of poor people become more, the government deficit will become more for giving subsidy and other kinds of help. And then the working population, the intelligent population, those who are, the smart workers, that will also go down. So in a way, the pandemic, at least in the short run, has given us a very big blow. I'll add to this, even the education sector. When the pandemic was ravaging around the world, about 1 billion plus students in different countries in the world could not go to school, could not go to college. And imagine the plight of the parents who had little children who are going to school now, they cannot go to school, and these people cannot go to office. Doing the office work and then managing the children at home was so difficult. It was force multiplying impact of the pandemic. So the pandemic has a very bad impact on this. There's no doubt about it. how fast we can recover, and how fast Indian economy is going to be again a double-digit growth economy. The future would depend on that. The loss is for everyone, not just for India. For many, many countries, the loss. But how to compensate the loss and move ahead in life, that will depend on the skill of the government and other factors beyond which you don't have control. How we manage it. But at the moment, certainly the dividend is not very visible.
Shri Kutan, you can pose your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for the lecture. One of my friends has put forward a question. Since his mic is not working, I'll be putting forward the question on his behalf. So the question is as, sir, I have a question as per Soumya Swaminathan, WHO's chief scientist. It says that as per its legally binding agreement signed with AstraZeneca last year, Serum Institute of India was expected to supply 1 billion doses for low and middle income countries with a commitment to provide 400 million doses in 2020 alone. I think this is in case with Africa. And he also mentions the case where US blocked raw material supplies to India. So he asked that. So actually, in the situation, India hasn't kept the word, and the vaccine diplomacy scenario has only deteriorated in this image because of not keeping the word. Is it so? What do you think? So this question asked with the Africa's case especially. Thank you.
You see, at that time, the Modi government wanted to gain in terms of soft power and help others. Pandemic is such a thing that if one country is not secured, no country is secure. And you have seen today, many people are blaming the government. Why did you export these vaccines? Why did not you treat properly? Your health infrastructure was so bad. There was no oxygen available. And why didn't you anticipate such a problem? You know, many questions were raised. Why did you hold political rallies? Why didn't you stop with that Kumbh Mela or something? Many questions were raised. Some harsh comments were made. See today. There are many countries which are now facing similar kind of situation. Read what is happening in Indonesia. People are dying because of lack of oxygen. Look at the US. The number had come down to 4,000 and today it is 15,000. Again, it's rising because of Delta virus. Right? Look at UK. It was about to stop the lockdown and now it has postponed the whole thing. And now Johnson is saying that, friends, you have to learn to live with the virus. It is not going to be eliminated. 27,000. Look at Russia. Russia is giving you Sputnik. Even Russia is helping you to co-produce Sputnik in India. But the number in Russia has risen like anything. Look at Brazil, poor Brazil, Colombia, Argentina. You know, situation is grim everywhere. So now people are realizing that we do not know the nature of the virus. It is mutating so fast. And as and when people are concerned about the Delta around the globe, Indians are talking about Delta Plus. When the Delta Plus news is just trickling in, now the Malaysians are saying that is the Lombard or something which is more dangerous than even Delta Plus or Delta. So who knows? Whenever there is a pandemic and the mutating virus character, the nature is not known, everything else has to be compromised at some place or the other. Rules, regulations, laws, all those are there, but there should be the capability also, right? That is one. And secondly, I don't know whether any one of you could see this. When the pandemic had just started, not even a week, I made a very short video of myself and put it on my Facebook. There I said, right now, it is not declared, but there is a third world war which is spreading. This war is truly global, unlike World War I and World War II. And in this war, the nation states are not fighting directly with one another. It is a war between the human beings and the non-humans. This is the time for the humanity to come together against a deadly enemy. You know, this is just like a hermit or a sage. I made all this nice moral preaching, but who listened? The Germans said, funded the companies make a vaccine only for Germany. Trump administration wanted to fund the companies and make vaccines only for America. There was vaccine nationalism. And the Chinese did whatever all they did, and they manufactured a vaccine and say, look, we will save you. This is the human nature. This is the human nature. As far as the national security issues are concerned, you can help others only when you have been able to help yourself. If some of you have traveled by air, the air hostess will always announce. And after a certain height, if there is insufficient oxygen, automatically that mask will fall down. First, put the mask on yourself, then on your child. Then on your child, not about your neighbors. So all these international law and serum signing agreements, all those things are okay, provided the situations were normal. And it was not intentional violation of the law.
Thank you, sir. Any more questions from the students? Okay, in that case, there is a question from a student, sir, whose mic is not working, so he wrote down the question, but it's interesting because this is not a question which is related to the lecture or India's national security, but it's by Dak Sharma, who is a second semester student. And this is a question that he has troubled me quite often in the class, and perhaps he has not got the right answer. And that's why he found an opportunity in you lecturing today and thought he will ask the question to you. And his question has to do with the difference between something like Monroe Doctrine and the Brezhnev Doctrine. That while the Monroe Doctrine, even though encapsulated way back in 1923, even before US envisioned to be a world power of any sorts, has lived on in different scholarly studies, even China's Monroe Doctrine, we say India's Monroe Doctrine. Somehow the Brezhnev Doctrine has not lived beyond the Cold War. And he wants your take on this.
Even the Soviet Union did not survive beyond the Cold War. The Cold War ended because the Soviet Union ended. So how can it go beyond the Cold War, the Brezhnev Doctrine? The mainland Russia is only 70% of the former Soviet Union. It cracked up into 15 different republics. So it has sunken in terms of power and abilities and capabilities. It's a regional power today, except in the military sense, right? So Brezhnev Doctrine died with Brezhnev in a way. And one of the reasons why the Brezhnev Doctrine was given a decent burial, because the Americans and others, they saw a very dangerous trend of Soviet expansionism. See, Monroe Doctrine was actually a doctrine of expansion of the American control and influence over Latin America, and a trade-off with the Europeans, that you don't interfere in our hemisphere, and we will not interfere in your hemisphere. Hands-off policy. But in reality, they wanted to expand the American influence into Latin America. And Latin America, being as it has been an American backyard, and there are not many European countries who would go all the way to fight a war with the Americans, even if the Americans were not military that powerful. In case of former Soviet Union, the odds were so many, except the Eastern Europe. Which other part of the world was there where the Soviets would go and say, yes, Brezhnev Doctrine, collective security in Asia and all that? So where was the capability? When the Americans were fighting communism in Korea, in Indochina, and elsewhere in the world, how would this work? That was only, of course, that was the intention. If India would have come on board clearly, probably things would have been different. But India from day one has been talking about some kind of strategic autonomy. We were forced to sign that Indo-Soviet treaty because of what happened, all of you know, in East Pakistan and all those things. So even then, when Indo-Soviet treaty was signed, many people would not appreciate. In the treaty, there was one line written there. The line was, the Soviet Union would continue to respect India's non-aligned foreign policy position. In Brezhnev doctrine, everybody would kowtow to Moscow. Mrs. Indira Gandhi, in spite of all these compulsions, was not the lady who would kowtow. So you cannot compare the two. That was historical, that was the colonial times, that was about sphere of influence. This was the post-Second World War period. Many countries had become independent. Independent countries would not succumb to the pressure unless they're completely helpless. And all these non-aligned countries would talk non-alignment simply because they found that there is an alternative pole. So alternatives were available. Whereas for the Latin American countries, where was the alternative?
Thank you so much, sir. If there are no more questions from the student community, before I move on for the formal vote of thanks, I request if Dr. Nandakishore has any last thoughts.
No, I think sir has covered a gamut of the issues that are associated. I think also the remaining parts were taken care of in the question answer session. I think it's well taken.
Thank you. In that case, I would request my colleague, Dr. Rabindranathan, to kindly propose a formal thanks.
Thank you, Manish. Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to make the vote of thanks for this distinguished lecture by Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, the Chief Rector of Jawaharlal Nehru University and Professor of American Studies at School of International Studies, JNU. I would like to thank Professor Mahapatra for his enlightening lecture on Indian national security amidst pandemic. And today's lecture will definitely help our students to learn more about various aspects of India's national security and the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. It gives deep insights into the topics and correlated with challenges presently the world is facing. I'm pretty sure that the description of Professor Mahapatra will definitely help us in studies and future. Once again, I would like to thank Professor Mahapatra for taking his time and from his busy schedule and enlightening us with his knowledge. Thank you so much, sir. I acknowledge here the contribution of my colleague, Dr. Monish Thoranbaum, who convinced the idea, developed the theme, took effort to organize the special lecture and performed as a good moderator. Thank you so much, Monish. And I would extend my thanks to Dr. Nandakishore, head of the department, the Department of Geopolitics and IR, who delivered the welcome address and supported the entire program with his insights and organizing capabilities. And at last, I want to extend my sincere thanks to all my students and participants who made this program a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was great. I enjoyed the questions. Bright students, good questions. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you,
Look forward to having you here.
Yes. I also look forward to it. And whenever you come over to Delhi, do drop by.
Sure,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay.
Take care, sir. Thank you, sir.
Bye.